My colleagues asked me to tell you one more thing about Thomas Mills. With all that he's doing as pastor of that congregation, he's a bivocational priest. He has a full-time job. This is all happening, but he still has a full-time secular job to provide food for his family. So moving on to the next story, we come to Nicholas Hayes. It's a story about discovering God's economy in your own congregation and community. Nicholas?
Thank you. Can you hear me all right? I am keenly aware that I am not a pastor and I am following in the footsteps of several, so please bear with me. But I work for a small nonprofit think tank called Criterion Institute. We work at the intersection of faith and finance. And I do want to start, like those pastors have, with a story of resurrection. So this is St. Stephen's Episcopal Church, a small parish in rural Connecticut. And for years, decades, fairly familiar story, St. Stephen's was on the decline. They had declining membership, they had a declining stewardship base, they had a declining endowment. They also had regular budgets in the red. And most importantly, perhaps, they had a declining sense of mission. They found themselves in that position of having lots and lots of little small ministries that were spread too thin and too uncoordinated to do anything together. How many of you are familiar with that situation? So about 4 years ago, the leaders took advantage of a pastoral transition to say, it's time to make a change. If we are going to survive as a church, we need to turn ourselves around, and we need to somehow turn around all of this energy that's going into worrying about our money to something life-giving. And so they began to make some hard decisions. They decided the next call was going to be part-time, not full-time. They began to make some budget cuts, but they built their first balanced budget and have kept doing it. And they also decided they wanted to really focus that scattershot mission. So they drew the whole congregation together in a process of envisioning what a single mission for the congregation could look like. Everybody got involved, and in the end they settled on a mission of food and feeding people. It was something everybody cared about. It connected to their roots as an agricultural community, and it gave them a lot of fun stuff to do. So they threw themselves into it. They began hosting educational sessions on the food system. They had food-focused Bible studies. They started a soup kitchen. They started a vegetable picking program for kids to go visit local farms. And then last summer, looking for something more to do, they did something radical. Simple, but radical. They made a loan. They made a loan to the coffee shop across the street, 32 Main. Previously, they had very little relationship with 32 Main. But as they began to get to know 32 Main and its owner, John, they came to realize that they weren't alone in this mission of feeding people in their community. In fact, their neighbor right across the street was a partner in that mission. Not only was 32 Main a coffee shop, it was also a restaurant, and it was a locally sourced restaurant. It was committed to building a market for local food. It provided jobs for several young people. Also, like St. Stephen's, 32 Main was in a little bit of a financial rough spot. In order to stabilize their revenue, they needed to build a porch. That would keep people's jobs. It would hopefully also allow John a chance to send his son to college. But he couldn't get the capital to do it. So 32 Main saw an opportunity, a mission opportunity, and it decided to make a loan, or rather, St. Stephen's decided to make a loan to John's coffee house. Now, this wasn't something that went over easily. As one congregation member said, what business does a church have being a bank, right? But recently, they'd also completed a Bible study that had caused them to focus in on the relationship between their faith and finance. And they began to realize that much more was at stake in their financial life than stewarding their own resources. They began to think about their economic relationships to the whole community, right? How often is our fixation on money actually missing the point of what our economic life is really about, namely relationship? How did they make their loan? They also discovered, once they set their minds to it, that there were many innovative ways to make a loan. And so they used an online platform called Kiva Zip. which made it possible to make a zero-interest loan with an intermediary in Key Visit to John with a startup capital of $500, and they could recruit contributions as small as $5 from their community and from the entire local community to build that porch. What does faithful economic life look like beyond the walls of church? That's what my initiative, 1K Churches at Criterion Institute, invites all of you to ask. We're a national initiative to engage 1,000 congregations around the country in a faith-based Bible study focused on the connection of faith, finance, and economics. And it's a very practice-oriented Bible study. It culminates always in making a small loan to a local small business that connects to your congregation's mission. Now, 1K Churches connects to our own mission as an organization. We were founded 14 years ago, and for 14 years, we've worked at the intersection of social finance, social entrepreneurship, and the church. We've seen in social finance and social entrepreneurship many leaders who are working piece by piece to change and reinvent how our economy functions. But we're also an organization with rich Lutheran roots. And we believe that the church has an integral role to play in realizing our vision, an economy that works for all. Because if you think about it, as a Christian community, we have one of the greatest resources to realize that of anybody. We have our theological imagination. In our Holy Scripture, we have visions of God's economy, right? An alternative economy of abundance rather than scarcity, of hope rather than anxiety, of interdependence rather than breakneck competition. What would it look like if the church began to apply that theological imagination, that call to be builders of God's economy, to our own practical life, in our own congregations? In the past, when the church has bridged theological and financial imagination, amazing things have happened. I don't know if you know it, but in the United States, the American church was a pioneer in starting credit unions, community banks, mutual aid societies, the health insurance system, more recently the corporate social responsibility movement. What would it look like today? And what could it look like in your own congregations? 1K Churches is meant to be a start, to prompt that reflection. And in over 100 churches now across the country, experiments are beginning to happen. St. Stephen's is one of them. They did make their loan. They raised $4,500 from 134 people in their community and around the world. John built his porch. John is repaying the loan at zero interest to St. Stephen's, so they'll have money to make a loan again. John is also going to church. And together, they've discovered that economic relationship can, just like any other kind of relationship we have, be a faithful and a human relationship too. And now they're asking, what's next? St. Stephen's members have started talking to local farmers, again wondering who can be our mission partners in feeding our community, right? Why should a church's mission, any more than our financial life, stop at the walls of our church? Why can't we invite more people into that mission? St. Stephen's members want to learn more about their local food system and how they can support it. They also know that many of their local farmers are in a similarly tough financial situation. It might be a match made in heaven. And around the country, this is just one of over 100 stories of congregations beginning to discover God's economy for themselves, not merely by reflecting on the Bible, but by practicing it in their own financial lives. So I want to leave you with a question. What would it look like to discover God's economy in your own community and your own church? Thank you.